Recapping the Sunday action right now on FFT Express. What's going on? Adam Azer, Heath Cummings here. It's Sunday night. We're about to do our big hour-long bonanza of a show. Spectacular, but I don't know how we're going to sum up Week 14 in 8 minutes, Heath. How about bonanza, right? What a week.
If you didn't have a big number this week, then you probably have a bad team. Although there were some disappointments, and I do wonder if there's some fantasy managers out there that were like locked into the 3 seed that are wishing they could have carried some of these points over.
Yeah, it's always like that, right? It's amazing that we had 6 teams on a bye also, including the Ravens. And I think I might have to give Josh Allen the MVP. Yep, it's a good call. It's a good call. He might have won it today. 6 touchdowns. But
if he was that valuable, he probably would have won.
Yeah, that's true. 57.9 fantasy points. I need to. Do you know if this is the most points since whenever?
I think probably so. Like the Bills decided they were going to do the tush push too, just to make sure that Jalen Hurts couldn't have a claim on the MVP. And that was a terribly. I'm sorry. Well, that's a big show competition. Man, the 49ers were awesome. Brock Purdy, Juwan Jennings, George Kittle, Isaac Guerendo until he got hurt. Is Patrick Taylor going to be the number 1 waiver wire now? That's how we should break it down.
3% roster. Now, we don't know the severity of the foot injury. It might be a sprained foot for Isaac Guerendo, but whoever they plug in there does really well. So obviously Patrick Taylor will be a huge priority. 3% roster's got a good chance to be the most added player. 49ers were great. Obviously the Rams were great. Puka Nacua, third best wide receiver game of the year. Let's just talk about injuries real quick. Other than Guerendo, which came late, we do have Derek Carr and Aidan O'Connell. O'Connell with a serious injury. Carr might have a broken hand. So these are not great passing teams to begin with, but we do have some must-start players on these offenses here. What do you think the impact is?
I will be very concerned for both Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers if they're catching passes from Desmond Ridder. And I thought Aidan O'Connell was awful today. Really showed why Gardner Minshew had been the starter, even though Minshew hadn't played particularly well. But there are levels to this, and we saw Desmond Ridder hold back Drake London and Kyle Pitts for a long time, and Drake London's now getting mediocre Kirk Cousins play, and it's still turned into a must-start wide receiver. So it worries me more for the Raiders. I think Alvin Kamara was a loser because, and they talked about this in the broadcast a lot, the interim head coach basically went to Kendre Miller and said, I know Dennis Allen talked bad about you in the press every single week. I'm going to give you a fresh start. And they gave him a fresh start, and Kendre Miller looked pretty good. And so I think this might be a committee in New Orleans with a bad quarterback, and really MVS, I guess, will be slightly less appealing as a boom-bust flex.
Yeah, Kamara is one of the biggest disappointments today. 22 touches against the worst run defense in football, or arguably the worst run defense in football. And he had about 13 points in this game in full PPR because he had 5 catches, 44 rushing yards. So he's now gone 7 straight games without a touchdown, 3 games without Derek Carr. Remember, they had awful quarterback play for 3 games. Kamara did have 17.4 fantasy points against Tampa Bay. He scored a touchdown. He had 8.4 fantasy points against Denver. He had 18.2 fantasy points against the Chargers. It was good, but he didn't have more than 13 carries in any of those games. I don't know. It's I don't really want to trust him. I do. Well, I'm going to trust him. But I don't know that he's going to hit 17 points.
I certainly wouldn't say he was one of the biggest disappointments today, because while it was a bonanza of a day, some of the absolute best players in fantasy were awful. AJ Brown scored 8 fantasy points. Brock Bowers scored 8 fantasy. The best tight end in football and a top 5 wide receiver both scored 8 fantasy points.
Okay, but I'm just saying, for the fact that he got 22 touches against the New York Giants and struggled. This is a guy that has been a little bit disappointing lately. That was tough to see. AJ Brown, I mean, no one's going to sit AJ Brown, but it's getting a little bit frustrating here. And another game with 21 pass attempts for Hurts in a game they were trailing.
Marvin Harrison Jr., somebody people might sit with the exact same line as AJ Brown a week after the team really wanted to get him involved in the passing game. Now, granted, they were behind the whole game in passing, so why would Marvin Harrison have a good game? Very disappointing performance from him and DK Metcalf, both in the same game.
Yeah, but Seattle is starting to play really well defensively. I think they've won 4 games in a row now. So they're not, they used to be a great matchup. They are not anymore. Let's take a break and spin it positive and talk about some of the better players from week 14 after this on Fantasy Football Today Express. All right, so we look at the best players. Josh Allen with almost 60 fantasy points. Unbelievable. Sam Darnold, though. We knew this was going to be a good game for Darnold against the Falcons. Then you had Tua, and you had Jalen Hurts, and you had Brock Purdy, along with Jared Goff on Thursday. So those quarterbacks really shined. But the only two that scored more than 28 points were Allen and Darnold. Anything to say about quarterbacks?
Allen was involved in 6 touchdowns, and Darnold was involved in 5. And listen, this was a great matchup for Sam Darnold, but he's mostly been a top 12 quarterback all year long. The Bears defense looked awful today. Good job, Dave, calling that. So I think we'll probably start him at home against the Bears next week. There's not much to say about Josh Allen, right?
No, it's cool. So let's go to the running backs. Do you think Zach Charbonnet, RB1 right now with more than 37 fantasy points in PPR? Actually, I think about 38 and a half. Do you think Zach Charbonnet, if and when Ken Walker comes back, is the best running back for the Seahawks?
No, I still think that it will be Ken Walker as the lead back, Charbonnet working on passing downs and in short yardage. He might cut into Walker a little bit. He kind of already had. I think there's a comment in the chat, Mr. Popinski, Charbs is better than Ken Walker. I think it's definitely true that he's better at some things than Ken Walker. But Ken Walker hits home runs at a much higher rate.
And what do you think about the Bucs running backs right now? We've got an injured Bucky Irving. He came into the game hurt. He left with a back injury. Rachaad White with a great game against Las Vegas. 17 carries for 90 yards and a touchdown. 2 catches for 19 yards and a touchdown. He's RB4 at the moment for week 14. Thoughts there?
I think if Bucky Irving is out, then we're going to view Rachaad White as a must-start running back again. He's got the Chargers, then the Cowboys, then the Panthers. Chargers is not a particularly good matchup, but the fact that Bucky was hurt going into this game and then left in the same game with it, different injury, I guess.
Yeah.
I'd be pretty concerned about him not playing next week.
We've got Puka Nacua, Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, Jawan Jennings, and Tyreek Hill with big games today. Those are your top 5 wide receivers: Puka, Addison, Jefferson, Jennings, Tyreek.
I almost felt like it was not that far from being a bad day for Cooper Kupp, because Puka Nacua is just so clearly the number one there. Kupp had the touchdown that he caught on his knee, and that was cool. And then he had another great catch. But like Puka Nacua has probably been, we've talked about how Nico was underrated as just like one of the elite wide receivers, and there was this short buy window of Puka Nacua. I don't see any reason that he's not going to be a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL the next 5 years.
Do you think Addison is a must start? This is 2 weeks in a row where he's 2 out of the last 3 weeks where he's been a top 2 wide receiver pending the results of the next 2 games.
I think he's a must start in 3 wide receiver leagues.
All right. And then at tight end, our top tight ends this week are George Kittle. 6 catches, 100. George Kittle's number 1 tight end. He didn't even catch a touchdown. David Njoku, Juwan Johnson, best game against the Giants for any tight end. They decided not to cover him on that play. He scored a touchdown. Trey McBride, 7 catches for 70 yards, and of course, no touchdown. And then kind of a lucky fortunate Jonnu Smith circumstances. He's a top 5 tight end this week.
You know, maybe they should have thrown it to him in regulation and they wouldn't have had to go to overtime.
Maybe. I think Juwan Johnson, though, is who stands out here because he's going to be someone you could pick up off waivers.
But he's probably going to be ruined by Derek Carr being there.
Exactly. All right, we're going to be back very shortly to talk about all of this for an hour with Dave and Jamie. So stick around for that. If you're not going to listen to that, well, thank you so much for tuning in to FFT Express. Talk to you next time.